A US citizen in Kabul reports that the Taliban are going door to door hunting Americans. And a leading Republican congressman is saying 6 planes with Americans and Afghan allies are being held hostage by the Taliban. Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community, and especially pro-America. 3 members of Congress have said Biden should be removed from office using the 25th Amendment. Of course he should. You only have to look at the stumbling, mumbling, bumbling performances we've had to endure the last few weeks to see that. He is clearly incapable of carrying out his duties properly. He thinks he went to the Tree of Life synagogue after the mass shooting there, but it turns out it was a phone call a year later. They have to tell him where he is, to wipe things off his face, which reporters to call on. If he can't run his own press conferences, how's he supposed to run the country? The people around Biden know how bad it is, but the last thing they'll ever do is invoke the 25th Amendment. They love this setup. A weak puppet who signs whatever they put in front of him. Perfect! That's the whole point of Biden. As the Silicon Valley saying goes, Biden's mental incapacity isn't a bug, it's a feature. It is why he's there. 46 members of Congress think Biden should resign, and of course, he should. Anyone with the slightest decency or responsibility, if they'd done this much damage to the reputation and authority of the country, would have resigned by now, but we know Biden won't. He's a vain, self-inflating machine politician who's been plotting and scheming to get this job his entire adult life. No joke, as Biden would say. In the mid-1960s, when he was in his early 20s, the first time he met the parents of his first wife, they asked him what he wanted to be, and he said, president. President of what? They asked. The United States, he replied. What kind of person talks like that, thinks like that? A sociopath with narcissistic personality disorder, that's who. Someone like that literally has no shame. Biden's not going to resign. So, how will there be accountability for the needless deaths, the nauseating debacle, the national disgrace of Biden's Afghanistan disaster? Mitch McConnell says, the midterms. What is he talking about? Biden's not on the ballot in the midterms. Yes, Biden's border crisis, his crime surge, his economic incompetence and disastrous handling of the pandemic, they'll all be part of the calculation voters make in 2022, but so will their views on their local candidate, issues in their district. Biden is responsible for the biggest foreign policy catastrophe in American history. And it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a policy that went wrong. It was cold, calculated cruelty, deliberately entered into for political reasons against the advice of the people on the ground. You can't just throw it in the mix alongside rising inflation and healthcare costs. If a president can do this much damage to the country, can be this derelict in his duty, can cause the death of 13 American servicemen and women and countless others without censure or rebuke, without any direct consequences, what does that say about the health of our democracy? People say, oh, well, you can vote against him in 2024. As someone might put it, come on, man. Who thinks Biden will be in any fit state to run again? The idea that he just slinks out of the White House without any sanction, any accountability for what he's done is unconscionable and unacceptable. So, we're left with only one option. Biden's behavior demands it and the circumstances require it. Biden must be impeached. And 11 members of Congress have already reached that conclusion. We know the threshold: high crimes and misdemeanors. There is no question, none, that Biden's behavior rises to that level. Here's how. 13 members of the United States military, hundreds of civilians, Afghans and others, are now known to have died outside the gates of Kabul airport from an ISIS-K suicide bomber. All these deaths were preventable and would have been prevented if not for the specific actions of the president. He said his military advisors told him to abandon Bagram. That's not true.
That our task was to protect the embassy in order for the embassy personnel to continue to function with their consular services and all that. If we were to keep both Bagram and the embassy going, that would be a significant number of military forces that would have exceeded what we had, or stayed the same, or exceeded what we had. So you had to collapse one or the other, and a decision was made.
It was Biden's decisions that gave the generals no choice but to abandon Bagram. He said no one predicted the chaos.
The intelligence community did not say back in June or July that, in fact, this was going to collapse like it did.
That's not true. A State Department dissent memo from July, read by Secretary Blinken and communicated to Biden, is evidence that the president was warned of the Taliban taking over if the August 31st deadline was kept, but Biden insisted on keeping it anyway. We now know from that leaked phone call with exiled Afghan President Ashraf Ghani that he told Biden at the end of July how close things were to collapse. Biden ignored that too. And the single most damning piece of evidence: we now know that even after their rapid advance, the Taliban offered to allow the US to control all of Kabul, not just the airport. Biden keeps saying there was no alternative. That is simply not true. There was an alternative, and he rejected it. As a direct result of these decisions, countless Americans have been left stranded behind enemy lines. Biden promised not to leave until all Americans were out.
If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
That was August the 18th, and look where we are today.
We're hopeful that in the coming days, the Qataris will be able to resume air service out of Kabul. And if they do, we're obviously going to look to see if Americans can be part of those flights.
Yeah, we hope maybe some other country can get them out. We'll look to see, because you know what? We're moving on. We don't actually give a crap about the American citizens we swore an oath to protect. We don't give a crap about a direct and unequivocal promise the President of the United States made just days ago. All we care about is some demented PR scam to try and give Biden a sick, mission-accomplished moment on September the 11th. They keep saying they'll help get Americans out.
If an American in Afghanistan tells us that they want to stay for now, and then in a week or a month or a year, they reach out and say, "I've changed my mind," we will help them leave.
Literally, the day after he said that, his own department issued a travel advisory telling Americans to make arrangements to leave that, quote, "do not rely on US government assistance." The President of the United States has knowingly, deliberately left hundreds, probably many more of his own citizens in the hands of a murderous band of terrorists. He talks about their assurances.
The Taliban broadcast on television and radio across Afghanistan on safe passage for anyone wanting to leave, including those who worked alongside Americans.
Public commitments, yells Biden. Here's what the Taliban's public commitments are worth. From the New York Times, quote, Human Rights Watch established that 44 people were taken from their homes and executed in July in the town of Spin Boldak. All 44 had received amnesty letters from the Taliban. The Taliban sent them letters of amnesty, and then they killed them. That's how Biden intends to protect the lives of the Americans he left behind. The most sacred promise of the US military is leave no one behind. Biden left hundreds, maybe thousands behind. If a commander in the military did this, they would face a court-martial. Compounding his crimes, far from ending the forever war, as Biden pathetically tries to claim, he's just restarted it. Just listen to this devastating assessment from Leon Panetta, who served with Biden as Defense Secretary and CIA Chief.
I don't think there's any question that our national security is threatened by what has happened. There is no question that they will provide a safe haven for al-Qaeda and for ISIS and for other terrorists to be able to reorganize, strengthen themselves again, and potentially use Afghanistan as a base for attacking not just the United States, but other countries as well.
Biden caused the death of 13 service members. He has deliberately left hundreds of known, identifiable Americans in the hands of the enemy. He has knowingly created a new safe haven for terrorists to attack America when an alternative that would have protected America and protected Americans was available but rejected. If all that isn't impeachable, I don't know what is. This must be a litmus test for Republicans. Biden promised competence, but instead brought chaos. He promised compassion, but gave us cruelty. He has betrayed our allies, broken his sacred trust, brought shame and humiliation on the presidency and this great country. But our contempt for this utterly discredited, despicable man is not enough. He must be held accountable. Biden must be impeached. Tell us what you think at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC, and share this message when we post it. Let's bring in our first guest tonight, former Marine intelligence officer and a member of the Armed Services Committee, Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher, who's done a fantastic job, I have to say, in pushing for accountability over this disaster. Mike, let's start with the news there at the top. We're hearing about planes with stranded Americans being held hostage in northern Afghanistan, the Taliban going door to door hunting Americans, not women and not just the people that we were all fearful might be their victims down the line. Americans now, despite all these assurances, what can you tell us? Have you heard anything from the State Department or anyone else about what's actually going on right now?
Well, if there's one thing I'm tired of hearing from the State Department and from President Biden, it's that we have assurances from the Taliban, because clearly the assurances the Taliban have given them aren't worth a darn thing. And these people think that somehow, because the Taliban want humanitarian assistance or they want international recognition, that we're going to be able to convince them to get Americans out of the country after we surrendered territory on the battlefield. They're completely deluded. They're operating as if this is a model UN conference in high school, not a matter of life and death. We have abandoned hundreds of Americans behind enemy lines. And the reports you referenced at the start of your show about flights being grounded by the Taliban, I have multiple sources on the ground telling me that's true. I've heard nothing from the State Department to disabuse me of that notion or give me confidence that they're tackling it with any sense of urgency. And for the last 2 weeks, I'm aware of multiple private efforts underway to try and evacuate Afghan allies, American citizens on private charters, but the State Department in many cases was standing in the way of those efforts because they were either incompetent or they simply didn't want anything to jeopardize their secret peace deal with the Taliban. And I guarantee you, Steve, the next thing we're going to hear them start talking about is how we need to recognize the Taliban, how the Taliban is going to help us do counterterrorism. It is an insane and humiliating position for the United States of America to be in right now.
It really is. Just tell us a little bit about what you were hoping to do, what you were working on in Congress this week. Well, not just this week, but leading up to this week, and how that has been received.
Well, all the Republican veteran members of Congress and Leader McCarthy and the relevant committee chairs came to D.C. on Monday, and we went to the House floor, and we simply asked that my bill be recognized. And my bill was simple. It said, give us a plan for how you're going to rescue those Americans who are trapped behind enemy lines after you get out of the country. Give us a list of all the military equipment, the billions of dollars worth of military equipment we surrendered to the Taliban. Give a explicit prohibition on ransom payment being paid to the Taliban, and then a sense of Congress that we won't recognize the Taliban. You'd think that'd be a common sense bipartisan bill. I was gavelled down on the House floor by the Speaker when I tried to ask for recognition for that bill. And all the Democrats, even those who behind closed doors have expressed their disapproval, have pushed the administration, have disappeared at the moment of truth when it has come time to hold this administration accountable. And again, now we're in this crazy position of having left American citizens behind where they're at risk of becoming hostages right now, or they're de facto hostages right now.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, you know, and they talk about I mean, look, it's very obvious they just do really want to move on. I mean, they're just treating this as some kind of media story that they can sort of get through and get onto what they really want to do, which is to sort of spend trillions of dollars on things that are just going to make no difference. But I want to get you also on the question, the argument I made on accountability, that for Biden personally, given his personal role in these decisions, there has to be a high level of accountability. And the question of impeachment, where do you stand on that, Mike?
Well, I think at a minimum, we all know Biden has failed the commander-in-chief test. I quite agree with what you said about if he resign. Of course, he's not going to do that. The thing about impeachment I can't quite solve is that then it puts Kamala Harris in charge, and I'm not sure that that's actually a better option for the country. So in the interim, at a minimum, let's demand a strong censure. Let's see if we can make it bipartisan so Congress is on record. And then I think you need to answer two questions. One, is there a secret side deal with the Taliban? That might amount to a crime, in my opinion. And then did we have targeting about the terrorist attack where we could have actually taken a shot to eliminate the threat prior to the deadly attack that killed 13 service members? That would be a whole nother level. So I think there's some things you can do to lay the groundwork. But again, Biden has, in his first foreign policy crisis, has failed the commander-in-chief test.
Well, very well put. We'll stay on it. I know you will too. Mike Gallagher, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. All right. Now joining us, the author of Always a Soldier, U.S. Army veteran and host of the Rob Smith is Problematic podcast, Rob Smith. Rob, it's great to see you. I mean, I wish it was in better circumstances. I've just been sort of dying to hear your take on all of this. We haven't had a chance to talk since the whole disaster started to unfold. I'll just give you the floor.
Absolutely. Well, I've done about 3 to 4 episodes on Rob Smith is Problematic, my podcast, about this Afghanistan debacle. But I wanted to talk about something that isn't getting a whole lot of attention, and that is the billions of dollars worth of U.S.-grade military equipment that has been left in Afghanistan that is now in the hands of the Taliban. Now, the Sunday Times over in the UK actually did a really good article where they broke down the amount of equipment that is still there. We are talking over 350,000 M16 assault rifles. We are talking over 65,000 M249 SAW machine guns. Now, I know the SAW machine gun because that was my weapon when I served in Iraq. We are talking Black Hawk helicopters. We are talking tanks. So now, in the midst of the debacle that is the Biden administration's handling of this entire thing, we have effectively made the Taliban one of the most well-equipped armies in the world on the taxpayer's dollar. And to me, that is outrageous. So when you are a soldier on the ground and you're in a combat situation, one of the things that gives you hope, one of the things that makes you feel secure is the fact that you are fighting an enemy that does not have the military capability that you have. You're dealing with old school assault rifles, you're dealing with IEDs, you're dealing with all of that other stuff. If we have soldiers actually having to get into a situation where they are back on the ground again in Afghanistan, they are now fighting the enemy with our own top-level equipment, and that absolutely terrifies me, Steve. And so we have the State Department saying that this equipment has been destroyed. They will not verify how the equipment has been destroyed. I think this is something that we are really, really not paying enough attention to, and I'm telling you, completely being honest, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night. I think that this entire situation has been a disaster. This is the first really big foreign policy test of the Biden administration, and he has completely and utterly failed. He has lost the confidence of the American people. He has lost the confidence of our allies that count on America to keep our word when we are in conflicts overseas, Steve.
And then just a quick last thought, Rob. What do you think it's done to the morale inside the military? Those who are serving so bravely on our behalf, what do they make of all of this? What do you think?
They're horrified by it, Steve. I get DMs and Facebook messages and stuff all the time with currently serving soldiers, currently serving active duty soldiers, and they are saying that we have put over 2 decades of our lives into this. You have soldiers whose children have served in Afghanistan as well, so you've got multiple generations serving over here, and they feel like it has been a total failure. And not that we left Afghanistan. A lot of people agreed that it was time to leave, but it is the way in which we have left that has completely humiliated us on the world stage, and it makes a lot of the soldiers that have served over there feel like their service was all for nothing.
And that's what's so disgusting about the whole thing. Rob, great to see you. Thanks very much. We'll see you soon. All right. In all the chaos cruelty and weakness on display from Biden the last few days. Let's make sure we don't let this pass without proper attention.
I'm here with my senior advisor and boy who knows Louisiana very, very well, man, and New Orleans, and Cedric Richmond.
Boy? Imagine if Donald Trump, when he was president, called his black aide boy. But it's all for Biden, as we know.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy.
It's just beyond a joke now. These aren't gaffes. They are systematically racist remarks that reveal Biden's true mindset. He's not just cruel, weak, dishonest, and incompetent. He's a good old-fashioned racist, too. All right. The last American flight left Afghanistan late last week, and despite the Biden regime's pathetic talking point that it's irresponsible to say that Americans are still stranded there, many still are, perhaps hundreds. So what's next for the U.S. citizens, green card holders, and allies still trapped in Afghanistan? Fox News contributor Sarah Carter has been following this situation very closely, as you know, and she joins us now. Sarah, what's the latest? I mean, can you tell us anything about this whole flight situation? I've been hearing that actually it's not just the Taliban taking some flights hostage. There's a problem with another bunch of flights with Americans on it.
That's absolutely correct, Steve. Fox News is actually reporting right now, and I've been able to get in contact with some members of Congress that are aware of the situation, that the State Department is actually prohibiting some of these flights from taking off from Mazar-e-Sharif, which is up in the northern area of Afghanistan, borders Uzbekistan, that these flights would be allowed to land in Doha if the State Department would give permission. Now, this is considered a Plan B. This is what they call Plan B. And the members of these flights are saying that it's the State Department that's prohibiting them from taking off, while there are other flights on the ground that are saying that it's the Taliban that is prohibiting them from taking off. This is the issue, Steve. This is President Biden's mess. He has created the hostage crisis and this White House. They basically gave the Taliban American citizens that they can use to work against us. So the hostage crisis was created by President Biden himself. There is enormous frustration. I've spoken to people on the ground there. I've talked to both Americans as well as SIVs. Those are people that hold special interest visas that were told they would be allowed to come to the United States, and as well as our allies. And remember, there's a lot of people on the ground that are considered what they call P1, high-level government officials, that are being hunted down by the Taliban as we speak. This is a very, very dangerous situation. People feel betrayed. And imagine sitting on a plane right now, waiting to take off, not knowing if you're going to be pulled off by the Taliban, if you're going to be executed, and the United States government is failing to do anything about it.
And just the fear, I mean, we don't even know. The thing I keep coming back to is that we hear all these reports, and perhaps you can add some context here. For example, the Taliban are working with, the Russian intelligence, Chinese intelligence to, track the communications of people that might reach out. So you've got to assume that there's people, Americans, who are just too frightened to even get into the State Department. Oh, get in touch with us, and we'll look after you. Well, right. would everyone there'd be legitimate grounds to worry about doing something like that? No.
Oh, absolutely, Stephen. Let me tell you this. It was disingenuous of the White House Chief of Staff, Rick Klain, to say that there were Americans who decided they didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
That is a complete lie. Let me tell you what happened. I was on the phone with Americans who were married to Afghan citizens who had all the paperwork in order, and they were told by the State Department, sorry, you're going to have to leave without your spouse. Sorry, you're going to have to leave without your children if you want to come to America. And they refused to do that. Some of them are now on the run and in hiding. They haven't been using their phones because they're terrified that the Taliban is going to find their location with the help of the Russian GRU. I've also spoken to U.S. sources and Western intelligence officials who have told me that not only have the Russians been training over the past year the Taliban, but there was also information that the Chinese been involved in training the Taliban over the past year, and that the White House was very well aware of this. So the situation is going to get far worse before it gets better. Right now, what they are hoping is that possibly that the Biden administration will change course, change direction, tell the Taliban that under no circumstances are they to harm anybody, any American or any ally, and demand that all those private flights that are on the ground now take off. And if they don't, this then becomes, as others have said, the blood is on the hands of the Biden administration.
Yes.
And I can tell you this, yeah, absolutely. That's what they're saying on the ground in Afghanistan. That's what these private chartered companies are saying. They are sitting there with their planes on the ground waiting for President Biden or somebody in that White House to make a decision to save some American lives.
And just finally, Sarah, very quickly, you've got, when you hear that, what you're just saying there about the fact you've got the Russian activity, the Chinese activity, what an incredibly dangerous situation that the Biden people and he himself knew how dangerous it was in Afghanistan, and they left people behind anyway.
They did. And not only did they know, but according to the sources that I've spoken with, they actually, people within the Defense Department as well as others were told not to bring this up. We're told not to mention any of this. Remember, we didn't hear much about the Russian GRU or the Chinese, other than that the Chinese were involved in mining in Logar province and interested in mineral rights. But according to the sources that I'm speaking with, not only was the Chinese training, military training on the ground or intelligence training, but so were the Russians and as well as the Iranians. So imagine what the geopolitical situation is there on the ground. And now we have approximately maybe around 200 Americans. That's the number on the ground right now, waiting for someone to rescue them, as well as a number of SIVs, those special interest visas. And you have the commanders of the Mujahideen, the former Mujahideen up in Panjshir Valley, you know, trying to fight the Taliban. But the Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda are using our weapons. It's a complete disaster, and we are in a much more dangerous situation now than we ever were before, Steve. It's really frightening.
And the idea... Exactly, and the idea that they can just sort of move on and forget about it, it's so disgusting. We're not going to let them.
They just won't be able to.
I know you won't. Sarah, exactly. Sarah, great to have that update. We'll see you a bit later on in the show. All right, remember this, at the end of last week's show, we're obviously going to be tracking Hurricane Ida, and we're also going to be tracking the first one of the climate zealots. Who's it going to be? Who's going to say, see, this hurricane proves we got to implement the Green New Deal overnight. That's what it proves. Of course, it's madness, but someone's going to be saying it. Guess who it was? This guy. He was right there with a tweet saying it proves the need for the Green New Deal and all the money that he wants to spend. It's all rubbish, of course, as we've been pointing out, many others during the course of the week. The number of people and the value of destruction from weather-related emergencies is going down, not up. The predicted models for North Atlantic hurricanes show that, yes, the intensity is going up by 5%, but the frequency is going down by 25%. It is all just part of the climate alarmism that we've talked about, and they just want to use it all to justify a massive increase in government power and control with your money. So we better not let them do it.